Get everybody in. Let's, oh, here they come. Oh, Pearl Jane Kwan. Hi, Pearl. Hi, Mario. Joan, Elena, Mike Dana, we see you.
Oh, awesome.
Matt Hill, Pinyi Song. I haven't seen you since the conference. It's great to
Lots
see
of
you.
friends tuning
Lots of
in. This is
friends. Look at all these
awesome.
friends coming in. We're so great to see you guys tonight. We'll give it just a second here, but we really don't want to waste any time. We have so much to cover tonight. Thank you all for being with us. My name is Robin Hilger. I'm the National Director of ACDA. And with me this evening, who you really came to see, are Jake Runestad and Todd Boss. Before we get started here, I also want to thank our co-sponsor, Poco Labs, as well as Cave Canem. I know that you have seen their logos on everything going out, but be sure that you check out the work of Poco Labs and Cave Canem as you're looking for other people who are, vibing on the same work that we're doing here. You might be wondering here, how did we get this idea to host this webinar? This is what I would say. See a problem, solve a problem. We're not going to solve all the world's problems tonight, but
But we're
um,
gonna try.
we have an hour, so we're going to get close. Um, Jake and I had a conversation. Oh, this is now, almost a year ago with region conferences early this year about the importance of text when it comes to choral works and the importance of text to composers, and then also that text is actually originating from a person, a human being who is bringing the spirit of their work to what we're seeing within our choral ensembles, and how important this relationship is between composers and poet lyricists, and that it's not uh, it is the text, but often it's the relationship and the bond between the composer and the poet lyricist that is actually driving many of the things. Whenever you say, oh, I just love this piece, I love how the words go together, I love the sense of what's happening, that many times there's a connection to the relationship between the composer and their partner, poet lyricist. So we decided, sometimes the relationship, it's hard to um, start a relationship like, hey, I'm a composer, but where do I find uh, someone who is living that would want to collaborate with me? Todd and I got together and had a very similar conversation, thanks to the introduction that Jake made for us, about what is it like to be a poet lyricist and know that you have words that can inspire, that are telling stories, that are all of these things. And many of our poet lyricists don't know about the opportunity to work within the music genre. And so we just decided, if we started putting everybody in the room together and talking about it, what might happen? So this is the first kind of experiment in what might happen. We are going to let you all know that we're planning a second webinar in November, on November the 12th, at 6 p.m. Central. So if you're on the call today, even if you're not on the call today, you'll be able to register for that webinar, where we're going to be talking about breakout sessions and the ability for people to really start to get to know each other. So we're looking at building a community, and we can't wait to see what happens with that. So that's kind of the genesis. That's why we're here today. And thank you all so much for taking your evening to join us. So, I think one of the questions, Jake and Todd, that people have is like, how did this thing start? What is the genesis story of Jake and Todd?
Yeah, and I should let Jake do the talking on that because he's the one who found me, not the other way around.
Yeah, well, it's thanks, Robin, for making this possible, and Todd for jumping in and putting this together. It's something we've had a lot of conversations about, me and Todd, and now to be able to kind of bring it to ACDA and say, look, poets and poetry and lyrics are the really the backbone of what makes choral music choral music. Yes, we have pieces that are, maybe on a vocalese, on a syllable or nonsense words, but most of the time we are using created texts. and composers set those texts to music. And so it really is what makes our art form so wonderful and meaning impactful, is that word that we connect with. And so I think that it's, Robin, I had posed a question to you in our meeting about, um, what was it like? You ask them what their favorite choral piece is, and then ask them who wrote the words, and most people have no idea. And so we're trying to change that. We're trying to get it so that, oh yeah, I love this piece, and the text is by so and so who was this person, and blah blah, because it just makes all the difference in the world to know that kind of context. So that's one aspect that's super important. And another is, how can we get more composers and poet lyricists to work together? And also, then bringing in a conductor, having a true collaboration with those three artists in order to bring new music to life. It's really exciting. So I'll get to our kind of how we got started in a second, but I see Robin just posted. Yeah, feel free to write in the chat, everybody, if you have questions, if you have a comment, throw it in there, and I'll try and keep an eye on it, and we can answer those questions and address them that way. So I had been composing for a while. I finished grad school. I studied composition. I moved to Minneapolis, and there I have a friend who's a librettist, Mark Campbell, and he said, "Oh, there's a poet. I read his work in the New Yorker once. His name's Todd Boss. You should look him up." And so I did. I looked him up, and I sent a message to his website and said, "Hey, I just moved to town. My friend suggested look at your stuff. Do you want to meet up?" And so we met up for coffee, and got to know each other's stories a little bit. And I remember you gave me at least one of your books of poetry. I think it was Yellow Rocket at that time. And so we just struck up a bit of a friendship and would meet every once in a while. I went to some of Todd's poetry readings, and just becoming friends. And then eventually we had the idea of, well, what if we wrote something together? And so, Todd, maybe you can talk about that conversation, what that
Yeah,
was like for you.
first, I just want to say I've heard from one of our folks, Robin, the chat is disabled for guests. I don't know if you can work on that behind the scenes. Um, so yeah, well, I had never written for any kind of ensemble before, right? And so I kind of sat down with Jake and said, "Teach me, what do you look for in a great text? What makes a singable line? What's a what's the what's the arc? What's the how do you evaluate what a text based on what criteria?" And I remember we had a piece of paper in between us, and Jake was making notes, and we were diagramming some stuff, and he did his best to explain things to me, and it was so interesting, just even the simple fact, which now seems so obvious, that the meaning is carried in the vowels. It was a brand new idea to me, as a poet. But once I knew that, once I could recognize that, then the writing it changes everything around how you distribute the meaning and where the meaning lands in sentences from word to word. And yeah, I was kind of hooked on the challenge more than anything else. And then Jake, I think we've done 10 pieces since then,
Hmm.
culminating in a choral symphony. Um, and I'm curious to ask you a question, Jake. Have you worked with any other living poets, living writers, the way we have worked?
I've worked with a couple librettists on some operas. Um, one librettist I worked on two things with, another one was one with, but not to the extent that we've worked and kind of developed this relationship. So um, yeah, I think it's I think an important part of how we came to collaborate is that kind of building that friendship and like kind of going into together and say, okay, let's learn, let's be open, let's see what happens. And you know, I know there are some artists that might say, well, no, this is what I want, and if it's not that, then I'm not moving forward, or you know what I mean, like, and so I think we both come at it with this openness and this desire to create something special that we hope is greater than the sum of its parts, and so that's an important mindset to have.
That's a good point. We're both kind of always pushing at one another a little bit, and we get in a lot of conversations before I start writing, and even as I'm writing, we work through drafts together. We're maybe jumping ahead a little bit, Robin, but we do a lot of really collaborative um, exchange during the process. Sometimes uh, uh, a draft that I show Jake is really close to the final, and sometimes it's way off, and I need to go back to the drawing board. Um, and all of that comes out in conversation.
And so, just a little bit about, oh, good, our chat is working now. So, throw your questions, your comments in there, and we'll keep an eye on. So, maybe it's helpful for us to just kind of give an example of our working process. And so, since our latest piece is Earth Symphony, let's kind of jump in there. And so, Earth Symphony is a piece for chorus and orchestra, 35-minute, big, kind of dramatic orchestral work, choral orchestral work. And this is a commission that I received from True Concord. This is an orchestra based in Tucson, Arizona. Fantastic professional choir and orchestra there. And they just said, we want a big piece. And I was like, okay. And so they didn't give any specific theme or anything like that. And so then it's, my job to figure out, well, what am I going to write about? And so I was throwing around lots of ideas, and I think that there are many artist responses to the climate crisis, and I think I've seen many of them and don't love a lot of them just in the way that it was approached, and so I started. I think I had this, I wanted to address it in some way. I think that was an important talk. So I started talking with Todd about this, and we were throwing around ideas and had lots of conversations about it, and then came up with this idea of what if we gave voice to Mother Earth herself. And so then we started rolling with that idea and started coming up with what would the form be, or what's the kind of storyline, what's the dramatic arc, and so we came up with this 5 movement form within our conversations, moving from these points of like human evolution. So imagining that humans have become extinct and Mother Earth is retelling our story of how we evolved, how we had this lust for power and progress, the way we kind of affected and harmed the Earth, ultimately our demise, and then her recovery. And so after a lot of that, then Todd goes to work, and maybe you can talk about your process, Todd.
Yeah, and there's all kinds of really great poetic license in that concept, right? Being able to characterize Mother Earth. Well, what would Mother Earth, would she use English even? It really begs all kinds of questions. And what kind of English would she use? If she did, would she sound kind of godlike? Would she sound sort of um, mythic, sort of biblical? Would she use Latin? We started I started thinking,
Yeah.
playing around with all these ideas. And then the arc of the story too, you've got this sweeping arc then, because now you're talking about space time, eternal time, right? You're talking about a time beyond and before human beings. And so I just started jiving on all these cool conceptual things. And I don't remember when we decided to do five pieces, 5 movements. But that helped a lot to kind of structure it. And then we kind of were thinking about that narrative arc and how it would end. And I finally one day came up with a great closing line, a good last line to leave the audience with. And that helped me start writing from the beginning. And we touched on Greek mythology. We explored the myth of Icarus. We obviously had to have a destruction scene, right? The collapse of the ecosystem, which was going to be a heck of a lot of fun.
Whew.
And um, Yeah, and then Jake, I think hit on or maybe one of us came up with the idea of a lullaby, a kind of after that, something to calm and quiet the room and sort of sing humanity to sleep. And so then Jake came up with the brilliant idea of rhyming that in the style of what was it? Purcell?
Purcell. Yeah, the Dido's Lament, the famous aria from Dido and Aeneas, when I am laid in earth, but then readapted for this case.
Right. And so from that, I had an actual, formula. I had a line length and something to
Hmm.
match, with a tune, which was really cool. So yeah, I
And
came up.
and I remember that there was a point too where you were writing in a certain kind of language that was a little more casual,
Mm,
and that affects so and I was reading it and like, yes, it's great when spoken or read, but if you think about the way that we sing and enunciate in a large choral force, because everything has to be unified and you have to power over an orchestra, there's a specific kind of enunciation that we have to do. So it certain kinds of words sound hokey if they're sung in that way. And so the language that Todd writes has to match the way the sound is produced.
well, the sort of whole symphonic kind of imperialistic tone that Mother Earth would take, right? It sort of asks for a different kind of diction altogether. So
Yeah.
yeah, so we ended up leaning into these and thous in a kind of biblical, language,
Uh-huh.
King James version.
Yeah. So then Todd goes to work, and actually I have Todd, if it's okay, I'll show one of our drafts that I have pulled up here. So Todd sends me, I think you can all see it, yes? Great. So Todd will send me, this thing with comments, and so then I'll take it and I will write all over it. Uh, I said, why all the exclamation points? Gender inclusive term. Can you fix this so not so list like? It's really tough to make lists musical. Ooh, love this. You mirrored me to me.
Hey Jake,
Uh,
hey
yeah.
Jake, why is it hard to make lists musical? Explain that a little bit.
So I think because it's kind of stop and starty, it's small chunk, it's this and this and this and this and this and
Uh,
this. When it's easier to sing longer lines, so we want longer ideas. Um,
hmm.
and so yeah, let's see, unclear. So some of it was like clarity of language, unclear who did the fashioning. Maybe I can zoom in here. Who is who here?
Yeah.
So just little notes like that. Awkward to sing. Next to mine. Next to mine is awkward to sing. I'm the pinnacle of
Mhm.
man. Next to mine. And it could be, it could sound like something else too. And then I'll make little notes about, ooh, this is suspended or reflective. C sings really well here. So I said maybe it's better to have the word C.
Yeah,
Reword, so humankind fell,
right,
which you ultimately changed to so fell humanity, so fell I.
right.
So anyway, this is a part of our process where I'll take this and just give a lot of notes and thoughts
So,
on some of the things.
so, so fell humanity. It's so much better than so humankind fell. And
Yeah,
I'm so grateful for the pushback. There's every challenge brings a new opportunity to be a better writer for you. And I think
yeah,
I really thrive on that relationship, and I think a lot of writers do. So writers are used to working with editors and getting feedback on their work. They come up through MFA programs if they do, and they go through all kinds of workshopping, and they're really used to this kind of give and take. So
yeah,
this is the kind of relationship you want with a writer.
yeah. And I love too how you can see on the right hand side, he gives some ideas of sound or theme or emotion.
Yeah,
Well,
there's
you told
you
me to
told me to
overwrite it. Feathery sounds, overlapping, working upward, soaring, a moment of recognition. Uh, Dizzy,
yeah,
he's losing consciousness.
these are notes about kind of what I'm building into this soundscape and how I'm
Yeah,
hearing.
which is really helpful. And maybe not necessarily that you're imagining the specific music, but more here's the emotional world or a rough
Yeah,
idea of some sound things.
yeah, they're
Um,
impulses. Anything
yeah,
else?
impulses. It's super helpful.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's so we'll go through that, and then I'll send it back, and then here's the fourth draft. So I think this piece was like 9 or 10 different drafts that we went through. Let's see if we can look at the opening and see maybe the difference here. If you say so and so that you're born, mankind, seen upon your face, there came a there came a dawn, a trace of mine, and you changed it to soon upon yours there came a dawn. Oh, we fixed that in a later one though. So put out as you score in the odds. So kind of more refining, more refining. Here's the sixth draft.
Jake,
And soon upon your face, they're drawn to trace of mine. Yeah.
I don't think that the share is not changing. So we're still looking at the same
Oh,
there. So I wonder
okay.
if we need to like stop sharing or toggle, maybe
Yes.
something up in a different window. And
Let
while
me
you're
try
doing
that
that, I
here.
want to give our guests a reminder over in the chat because we have so many great things happening over in the chat, except a lot of it is coming into host and panelist only. So friends, if you open your chat, and you
Ah,
look at the bottom where you would type your message, look right above, and there is a blue button. If it's set to host and panelists, the only people who are seeing you are Jake and Todd and I, and we love that, but we know you have a lot more to share openly. So toggle that button so that it says everyone, and it's showing blue everyone, and then everyone in the webinar will be able to see um, you. And yet, Jonathan Talberg,
oh,
host
John's
and
not
panelist
causing trouble,
only.
is he?
I was gonna say, never, nobody from Western region would ever do anything
Never. He's
like
so
that.
well
Yes.
behaved.
So now we are seeing, yes, now we're seeing the changes. Thanks for that, Jake.
Okay, good. Okay, so this is the sixth draft. And so each time I think we're really just trying to hone in and like what is absolutely necessary, right? And I think
Thank
it's
you for
great. Like the
bringing,
first drafts, you write them out and you just said, okay, here's a bunch of stuff, and
yeah.
then we can really work to hone it in to like the true essence of what we need.
Less is almost always more, right? So, and but I start with more, and then we figure out what's absolutely essential and what you're most excited about. What Jake responds to is what I go highlighting, on my desk, and then I'm kind of thinking about those lines as sort of the real structure that I'm working with, because those are what the things that Jake's excited about. I want Jake to be really excited, right?
Yeah.
Music's gonna be better if he's excited.
You just set us up really well, Todd, because there is a question that I think is pertinent to that. So, one of the questions says, so what makes working like this more creatively fulfilling than, let's say, setting text by someone who is long gone?
Well, I think the idea of collaboration and kind of what Todd mentioned before is that we pull each other in different ways. And so, like another piece that we wrote called A Silence Haunts Me, a letter that Beethoven wrote that we adapted for choir and piano, in which he's kind of dealing with his impending deafness. And originally, I had another concept of like more focus on Prometheus because he had written this Creatures of Prometheus ballet, and the idea of him being like Prometheus. He was uh, punished with his deafness because he gave this gift of fire to humankind. And I had this whole concept, so we could call it the gift of fire. And so then, I'm telling Todd all this stuff, and he goes to work and then kind of pulls it in another direction, focusing more on Beethoven. And I was kind of pushing back a little bit on that first, but then
I
we
went
found our way.
I went to sleep that first night after you planted the seed of this idea, and I woke up in the middle of the night just kind of with the line, "Silence is coming for me," or "A silence comes for me," and
Yeah,
because that's what's happening to Beethoven, and because I had fallen asleep thinking what a horror it must have been for him to be losing his faculty of hearing,
yeah,
and what that must have felt like. And I thought, when I woke up the next morning, I thought I still had that line just buzzing in my head. I thought that is really, that's a powerful thing to bring.
yeah.
So yeah, it's that kind of exchange. where the magic is
Right.
for
So
us.
one person gives and then the other person runs with it and then you bounce things off and it's just like energizing because one thing leads to the other and then you can take it totally direction or someone can challenge you on a moment or
I mean,
which, dead people aren't so good at.
when you think about all of the magic that you as a composer, and not just you, Jake, but any composer brings to the work, right? All the decisions, all the amazing, complex conversation that you have with yourself, and then you double that by adding in another artist who's also is deeply invested in it as you are.
Right.
That's kind of the amazing part of it.
Yeah, it's really special.
So,
So,
So another question.
Mhm.
Do you write melody around existing text? Todd, is text written around existing melody? So in our collaborations, uh, we always start with the text, and I think that that's really important because if we try to force an existing text into, or force text into an existing melody, it's much more different and much less natural feeling. I believe that my job is to illuminate the text through music. And so I want to find the most natural and organic way of doing that. And so for me, it's starting with the words because they dictate everything. They dictate the form, they dictate the emotional world, they dictate the sound of things. Um, each and every line takes us somewhere different. And so yeah, I think for me the text is first and foremost.
which
I
is
think
such an
that's an interesting like approach, right? When you think about chicken or egg, right? It's like, um, but is there, Jake, when you talk about that, and then also Todd, what it means to you, when you say the text leads, that's what you're talking about. There's also kind of a little bit of an implied, I don't know that this is true because it ends up being on equal footing, but it's a little bit like the music starts in a secondary nature to what the words are expressing and then
Hmm.
comes to its full potential, right? Um, on equal footing. And I am not a composer, but I would think, as a composer, do you have it where you're like, man, I just have this melody in my head and I really need some great words to, which is a different approach. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but um, what I hear you saying is an intentionality of starting with the text first in your work there.
Yeah.
I mean, that's Jake's style, but if he did bring me something to fit, like the Dido's Lament, yeah, I would rise to the challenge. It's not unheard. It's not something that a poet wouldn't do, right?
For sure. So, can you guys talk to us a little bit about, so we've been talking about, the great relationships, everything is cranking, everything. So now we need the tea a little bit. So like, what happens when you're like, so listen, Todd, you're like, yeah, well, Jake's told me 19 times that he doesn't like this word, but that's the word because that's what's in my head. That's what resonates. That is the story that I'm telling. He is going to need to love that text or so tell us a little bit about working through even in really great collaborations, right? There's always these sort of working through I call it muddling or the toil, right, where you're just toiling. Can you guys talk about the toil a little bit?
Hmm. I can only point to definitively to one instance of that happening where I had written something that was not ready to let go of. And it was in the Beethoven piece, and Jake knows what I'm talking about. It's right toward the very, very end of the piece, and it's just a line that's a little bit offbeat for the rest of the piece. And I knew that, but I still felt that there was something just somehow poetic about it, and I couldn't even articulate it. I couldn't even put my finger on it. I couldn't even explain it to poor Jake, and he's really struggling even right down to the wire. We were, I think, the night before or 2 nights before the premiere with this, he had written it into the score by then, but it wasn't really playing well, and we didn't really know what to do about it. And finally, he hit upon an instruction in the score that would help the choir dramatize it in a different way and bring it
Yeah,
out.
so this was a silent haunts me, and at the end, it's like Beethoven is getting to the end of this letter. He's kind of closing, and the concept that Todd has is, as ever faithfully yours, and then suddenly a bell, looking up as if he maybe thought he heard a bell tower ringing, and he looks up through the window, and there's this moment of kind of suspense. Can he actually hear it? Is he hearing it, or is he losing it? And then hear me and be well, then signs off on the letter. And so I was working so hard to, I was like, Todd, I don't know, man. I can't make this work. And it literally was the night before the premiere. And this was like, the Brock Commission for National ACDA. It was super like exciting, but also terrifying. And I'm in rehearsal with Linda Hassler in the Capital University Chapel Choir. And we get to that moment, and I realize the audience, they need some sort of gesture to understand what's happening here. And so it was something as simple as like, we're going to have the choir lower their heads and then a bell, a
because it's
bell.
because it's interruptive, the phrase
Yeah.
itself, and it doesn't flow. And it
Hmm.
in the text on the page, I can signify with an exclamation point or parentheses to set something off visually, but he finally figured out how to do it in performance.
And even with just the music on its own, it didn't feel right. And so it required that small movement. And I think that's another thing that's so important to think about when we're creating choral music. It's music that's performed. That's really the main intention. Some people may be writing for recordings, but really our main art form is to be performed, and that involves humans on a stage that are being watched. So there's a visual aspect of it. And so taking that into account as well is really important.
Yeah,
What is
thinking
it
about
what does it look like to see those words on stage?
the theatricality of that moment is really interesting as an audience member too, because there's this sign off, things are getting quieter, it's drawing to a close, and then all of a sudden there's this shift in the choir itself that's just sort of jarring in a way, but just enough to make you think, oh, what's happening? And it tunes your ear, makes you listen differently all of a sudden.
Yeah.
So it does do all that poetic work that I wanted it to do, but I wouldn't have been able to do it alone. I needed, Jake had to come up with a way to deliver it. So that's a perfect example of how the magic that happens between us.
And it, yeah, it required me to trust your artistry, right?
Hmm.
And because you were so committed to it, and I thought, okay, well, gosh, if he's not letting down on this one, then there's
I can
something.
I can usually let anything go, but
I
that
know,
one.
but this one was like, it's like, dang it, Todd.
Well, Bears, just we're at the half hour point, a little over, but I just wanted to mention that I've put a link to Poco Labs in the comments, and if you can see it there, click on that. It'll tell you a little bit about Poco Labs and what Jake and I and a few others have been cooking on, designed to inspire poets and composers to get together more often. And we're also, should we plug that next event? Robin, November, I put that in the chat too, November
12th,
12th.
12th, yes, November the 12th at 6 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Central Time. Todd, I put a link earlier, but I'll do it again to Cave Canem, so that people can check out their work.
Yeah, and I'm happy to, if anybody wants to connect with me to get recommendations for poets to work with, I can connect you. So keep that in mind too. And of course, Jake knows the writers as well, but we're happy to be sounding boards.
One of the things that's really apparent, when you guys were talking to each other as well as talking about the work is that you have a real respect for the knowledge, the expertise, the passion, the insight that each other bring to your partnership. It's very low ego, right? Because we're going to do a 1 plus 1 and somehow this is going to equal 73, right? Because we aren't going to come up with Jake's idea, or we aren't going to come out with Todd's idea. We're actually going to come out with something that neither maybe had conceptualized from the beginning, simply through the creative um, process. And so that's really, I think, if you were going to talk about, maybe some things to look for in a creative partner, what have you found? Or, a creative partner can be any age and in any of those things. But if you say, man, this is the sauce here, right? Of anybody that you work with, it's maybe boiled down to these kinds of characteristics. What might you say?
Well, they've got to be a good cook. They they better be funny. No.
They got to be easy with the whiskey, a lot of whiskey.
Well, I think a big one is uh, vulnerability and curiosity. Um, those things that allow someone to collaborate well. Being open to changing things, being open to ideas, respecting the artistry of the other person. That all comes under that vulnerability wing. And then curiosity is hugely important because it it allows us to entertain completely different ideas, right? And not just shut something down, but like, oh yeah, let me actually think about that. Or, I was at the art museum today and I saw this painting and it had this in it and it made me think about this piece and like, I don't know how that plays in, but here's an idea. And then you can throw that back and forth. And so for me, those are two big ones.
Yeah, Jake and I have a real friendship. It's not just a working collaborative relationship. And so we do a lot of sharing of things that we're reading and articles we've seen, things that we're thinking about, whatever's on our minds. And so that is a really valuable tool too. It doesn't necessarily, it's not a one-to-one, but it's there and it's valuable. I would say just also Jake's an unusual composer, maybe. Well, I don't know, not all that many composers, but I would say that Jake is unique in his discernment of good literature. He reads, he's a real reader. He reads poetry too. He's not, he doesn't just read for texts that he can set. He reads and enjoys poetry. And he knows a good poem when he hears one. And so the bar is high for me. He doesn't turn to me and say, write me something pretty about war and peace. He puts the screws on and gets in his specific, and he knows a good line when he hears one. So that's an incredibly valuable asset to the relationship.
And I think that as far as that curiosity point, we have, even though our specialties, yours is writing and mine is music, we have to educate ourselves about the other, right? So I need to learn about poetry and what it means to analyze a poem and all of the various techniques and devices that are used and know poets and know forms and things like that. Just like, you have studied things about music and you listen and you learn in that way.
And I am still learning. Sometimes I forget the things that I've already learned about this. And the thing about writing is that writing a poem is not the same as writing a lyric. They're completely different, actually, in many many ways. And so the one doesn't necessarily. It's kind of like writing comedy, or writing a children's book. These are vastly different skills. Just because you're trained as one kind of writer doesn't mean you can write anything you set your mind to. You've got to practice it in its own genre. So yeah, I think that it's not curiosity so much as it's a willingness to be challenged and to rise to a given challenge. That's what
Mhm.
you want in a collaborator, I think.
I agree. Someone who, what do they say? Iron sharpens iron, right? When you're there, with each other. Chris, I think, has an interesting question that he put in the chat, which he says, how often do you feel compelled to change or edit pieces after its premiere? Like, how do you guys decide that it's done? When when do you know that it's done?
Hmm.
Uh, every once in a while, like with Earth Symphony, there were a couple words that Todd wanted to change when we were in rehearsals. And then afterwards, there was a Latin thing that you had, a friend of yours who's a Latin scholar had mentioned, it would be a little bit better in this version.
Yeah, and it was
Um,
a syllable, a difference of syllable sound,
yeah,
and you were cool with it, so we made that change too.
yeah. But as far as music wise, I always think of a premiere, most premieres is like, this is a draft, like the final draft, but it's still a draft. And you don't really know what it's like in the air until you hear it and have people experience it in a room and see what works. So I'd say most of the time it's pretty close to the final version. With a piece like Earth Symphony, which is massive because it's full orchestra and big chorus and it's 35 minutes long, there are a lot of details to work out, especially in the orchestration. Just little things like, okay, the balance didn't quite work there, or I need to take out the crotales because they were just too loud and too pingy there, or I think this is better in the horn instead of, whatever. So after the premiere, I made some of those changes. Um, maybe it's a rhythmic thing in the choir or whatever it might be. And so, it's super helpful to be able to have rehearsals and a performance under the belt to like say, okay, now I figured out what worked and being able to change some things in the rehearsal process, but sometimes I can't change a bunch because we have like two rehearsals or whatever. So some of that happens after the fact.
Yeah. Todd, is it the same with the the poetry? Like, do you ever consider it done, even if you send it out into the world?
You mean the lyrics that I write for Jake
Yeah, yeah.
in particular? Um, when he says he's ready to start writing on it, I consider it done unless he comes back to me later with, something that he can't figure out. And then I'll go back to work on, a line. But no, it's very rare that I think Earth Symphony was so large, it's the biggest text that we've ever worked on together. And so there was bound to be little things in rehearsal, but they were just single individual words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think I want to make sure that we highlight that we are going to hear the Earth Symphony at the ACDA National Conference in March on the Saturday evening concert, the 8 p.m. concert. We hope that everybody will make sure that they stay around for that concert.
Yes,
Uh,
tell all your friends, don't leave Saturday, stay till Sunday. It's going to be a
they
really special performance.
So it will be the Earth Symphony. Todd will be around. It is going to be the Baylor Symphony and the Combined Texas Collegiate Choirs. You can see a list of those choirs on the national website. And Jake will be conducting the work. So we are excited, particularly since you've been on this webinar now. So you have some story there about what that creative process was like, and we heard about these big moments, and we heard about tucking Mother Earth to bed at
We've
the
got we've got about 15 minutes left. I just want to encourage everyone to use the chat for hesitations that you might have about working with another artist in this way, or experiences you've had that have gone well or poorly, or what anything that you can share about thoughts on this topic of collaborating.
yeah, while they get their uh, thoughts in the chat. Also,
Jake, should we touch a little bit on the technical aspects just briefly about contracts and all that stuff? Do you want to kind of lay that out a little bit?
Yeah, so when we first started out, I had existing commissions and um, Todd needs to be paid for his work, and so I actually paid him out of my commission fee because it wasn't planned originally for the ensemble, and I didn't want to bring another cost to them. And so then it got to the place where, if I wanted to be able to do a project with Todd for this, I would approach the commissioning ensemble, say, "Hey, I'd love to have an original text for this. Can you commission Todd as well?" So then he would get a separate contract with them for his part of the commission. I get a separate contract for my part of the commission.
That way it
And so then
doesn't
he's,
commission, it's an additional amount, right?
yeah, yeah. So then we're each getting our parts. And then, once we have that, we have contracts. I have my own publishing company, so all the music is published there. So we have contracts that, outline, the royalty rate for each of us and the rights and things like that. So, yeah, so we make sure that that is all covered. And then the other thing that we've had a lot of conversations about, and that question of, what's your favorite choral piece, who wrote the words for it, is in a lot of concert programs or advertisements for the premieres of new works, you see the composer's name, this piece by Jake Runestad, and then there's no Todd Boss on there, and especially for a living writer, I think that's really important. So I'd encourage you in concert programs, list composer and lyricist or poet. That's just super crucial to have if we want to elevate that work, which should be elevated in our world. So that's something that we're passionate about as well.
I think there's a question in the chat here that says, so if I'm looking for a poet, where do I find one? Anybody I feel like we need an app that's like a
Yeah,
dating app for composers.
I agree. Yeah, I'm happy to be your
we do.
matchmaker. I'm happy to be a matchmaker, and you can email me. I'll put my email here in the chat, and feel free to reach out if you've got a project going on. I will put that there. And then I've got a website. You can reach out to me on that too if you missed the email. And then we're trying to organize something can we talk about the panel? Yeah, so at ACDA National next year, we're going to have a mixer. And we're going to invite as many poets from the region. We can't fly people in unless somebody listening gives us thousands of dollars. But we're going to try to inspire some great poets from the region to show up one day at a CDA conference, and then get you all liquored up and introduce you to each other so that some sparks can fly.
And and I think there are lots of ways to meet if you're a composer and you want to meet poets, go where poets hang out. Go look up the bookstores and go to poetry readings, and you'll meet not only the poet that's reading, but other poets that are attending. And just say, "Hey, introduce yourself. I'm a composer. I'm looking to collaborate with poets. What are you working on?"
Go to your local bookseller and ask them who's local in the poetry section, and they will tell you who the poets are because they've had them in before to do readings, and they'll show you their books, and you'll vibe with one of them, guaranteed.
Yeah. Another great resource is poets.org. You can sign up for a poem of the day email where every day they send you a poem. It's all living poets in the weekdays. The weekends is public domain dead poets. That's a great way to learn a new poetry, learn a new poets. Then you can get in touch with those poets and see if that might be a good fit. For poets, composers like to hang out at concerts. Composers, you can search choral music on YouTube and listen if there's a piece that maybe you like, and if happens to be a living composer, look them up, send them a message. Hey, I'm a poet. I really enjoyed your music. I'd love to send you some texts. A lot of these cold call things can be really helpful, and I'm totally open to that. I love it if poets would contact me and say, "Hey, I'd love for you to check out my stuff." And whether or not it's a good fit, it's great to be able to learn about a new poet. So I think those are great resources. And then, go ahead, Todd.
Well, we should also mention that we're hoping to do the same thing that we're doing at ACDA, the mixer I talked about, at AWP next year too. AWP is the week after ACDA National in Los Angeles. and it's the annual writers conference. It's Association of Writing Programs. So it's anybody who's ever been involved in an MFA program, which is pretty much everybody writing in every genre. And we're going to try to do the same thing there, get composers from that region. And if you're in that region, or if you want to get out to LA that week, that weekend, let us know so that we can plug you into that too. That's another way to mix.
I'm going to put the AWP website in the chat because they have lots of good information on there. They've got, videos, things about their conferences and things
Hey, Robin,
coming
we
up.
should mention too, if this is going to go on YouTube, we're going to post this conversation on
Yeah.
YouTube. Can we leave the comments section open there so that if people are looking for writers, they can post?
Oh, yes, for sure. I think,
Great.
that's part of this initiative, right? Which is like, how do you get to know someone? Well, just like all of us on this call, right? You get introduced by someone, so that's a great way. The cold calling, I think sometimes that can be intimidating to people. They think, "Oh, I'm just starting out or something." I don't know. Sometimes just say it out into the world, like, "Hi, I'm a brand new composer," or "I'm a brand new poet. I'm kind of trying several different things." Like just say it. Don't make them guess that you're new if you want to do it. And one of the things that I think is so great about these spaces, ACDA spaces, the AWP spaces, people are there because they want to meet people. That's the point. They expect people to come up to them, introduce themselves, have these conversations. And so it's not it's not like a weirdo stalker thing.
Hmm.
That's an expectation.
Yeah, I've got a question here from Matt. I'm always nervous to ask poets because as a part-time composer, I worry how to figure out the time aspect. How do you suggest figuring out a working relationship and timelines and how to make sure that you're a good match that way?
Well, I think it usually begins with, when do you want the piece performed? If there's someone who's commissioning you, let's say that their performance is in March, and let's say that your deadline is in, December 1st. So then you need to keep working back. Well, let's see, for, the 5-minute choral piece, unaccompanied choral piece, let's say that takes you 3 months to write. So then you would start it whenever that is. And then the poet, let's say you want to give them 2 months. So then you just kind of keep working back, I think is helpful.
Yeah, and then as far as the time that it takes between the two of us, maybe how much to budget for actually sitting together and working things out. What would you say, Jake? Kind of depends on the size of the piece, right?
Yeah. Um,
We usually
it's
start
hard
with
to know.
a half-hour conversation by phone just to throw ideas around and then follow that up a couple of days later or a week later with another kind of more substantive one once one of us has had an aha, and we'll exchange those via text a little bit. But
Yeah.
this isn't onerous. This is fun. This is exciting.
Yeah.
It goes by fast because you're having a good time. And then once I go to write, I might take a week or 2 or 3. I'm an unusual writer in that I always jump deadlines. I like to try to be ahead of the timeline. So I usually can present something to Jake relatively quickly so that he can respond, and I have plenty of time to go back to the drawing board if I have to.
Hmm.
But I don't know, Jake, what would you say altogether, the working hours between the two of us for any given piece might be what?
Well, that's hard to know.
Yeah, it depends.
It's because yeah, who knows? I mean, we have so many, conversations and then text threads and emails. And so it's like all these different forms. And then we're thinking and then coming back and talking, and 6 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours,
Not
who
not
knows?
not including the writing time, my writing time.
Right,
I don't
right.
think it's all that much, is it? That seems like a
Yeah,
lot.
maybe not.
Yeah.
It's funny, it's a little bit like time flies when you're having fun. That's what I hear you guys
Uh-huh.
say. Like maybe we don't exactly know because we're
I
working.
remember I remember when I wrote uh, and so I go on. Uh, I don't think there was any back and forth with that one, was there, Jake?
Uh, there a little, I think just a couple things.
Yeah, just a couple things, and then it was
Yeah,
pretty much done. So it really depends on the piece, and
yeah,
yeah.
totally depends. There's a question here from Tracy. We have started a new club this year, the Music Composition Club. Woohoo! 40 students who compose and are budding lyricists. Awesome. Any advice for the young students desiring to follow in your footsteps? I think just be open to studying all the different kinds of music. Study the music you love and really study it. How do the composers put together each harmony, each rhythm, each line? What are the words and how did the composer set those words to music? What's the meaning and how did the composer paint that meaning? I think the big question is why. Just look at everything in the score, ask why. Why did they do this here? Why this word? Why this rhythm? Why did the line rise to this word or in this moment? Just lots of asking why.
I would get them over to poetry reading on the campus or to an English class where they're studying poetry and do some exchanging of inform, get the conversation started right there at school.
And sing. Get the poet singing
I
and get the composers trying their hand at some poetry. That's one of
don't
the
think you
best
want to hear
ways
me
to learn.
sing.
Todd, there's a question from David Brent here.
Hi, David.
Do you ever share sections of your text with the composer as it is being written? Or, oh, I lost it. Or do you try to send a finished draft?
Yeah, I always send a draft that I know is probably either over wordy or too much ideas or too big, too stuffed full of thoughts for, one. And then Jake will kind of answer to what he really responds to, and then I'll know what to do from there. Good question.
Yeah, I see questions about listening to everything, analyzing pop songs. I think it's really analyzing any and all kinds of music. I think sometimes in our choral ivory tower, we like to poo-poo certain kinds of music, and I think that that's not a great thing. And we can learn from everything. I mean, my goodness, listen to a Joni Mitchell song and analyze those words, and it's extraordinary. I mean, it's some of the best lyrics and poetry in Sondheim, and all different kinds of things we can study and learn from.
So we're about to the end of our time here. Sort of closing thoughts for everybody on the call.
No, we're just grateful to be here. Thanks for having us, Robin. And we're here if you need us. Reach out if you'd like to keep the conversation going or you want to be involved in POCO Labs. I sent that link. And also remember that next event on November 12th at 6 Central. And we'll post about that with ACDA, right?
We will. Everybody who registered for this webinar, we have your email address now, and so we'll let you know when this video is posted, so you can share it. We know there may be things here where you're going, "Ooh, so and so needs to hear this," or they weren't able to come, so it'll be open on the ACDA National YouTube, and we'll also let you know about that upcoming the content for the upcoming webinar. Like I said, save the date, November the 12th. There. And I'm grateful to Todd and Jake, who both said, like, hey, if we were going to do something, and then we started talking about something, a very creative process. I feel like between us, I've learned a lot about both of you in this work, and I'm really appreciative of your time in sharing. And we're looking forward to hearing the Earth Symphony at National Conference and the continued conversation here, particularly in November. Thanks to everybody who joins us, and we look forward to seeing you all next time. Have a
Thanks,
great night.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being here.